My name's Dr. Tom Phillips. I'm a lecturer in humanities at UEA. And what I'm going to be talking to you today is not so much about games themselves. We saw Dean's really interesting talk earlier where he talked about Bloodborne, and he was very specifically looking at the game text and how the game works and how you go about playing the game. I'm not going to do that. What I'm interested in is not so much talking about games, but it's about talking about how games are talked about. I'm interested in what it means when we say we value games. And I'm interested in what that value is. So the things I'm going to look at today in this short talk is, well, what is valued in games? What kind of things do we value in games? How is that value articulated? And what does such notions of value mean for how people make games? Because a lot of the work I do involves talking to developers and seeing how games actually get made and the kinds of issues that people have to deal with. So what I'm going to be dealing with first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about Minecraft and talk about how it can be exemplary of many of the kinds of value that we see going on within the contemporary games industry. Following on from that, I'm then going to talk about the British games industry as a whole and thinking about the kinds of issues that people have to think about when they're getting their games made. I'm then going to think about, there we are, how are games valued? So thinking about the different kinds of ways in which people think about games and talk about their inherent value. And finally, I'm going to kind of associate these notions of value with a sense of kind of Britishness or British identity. How valuable are games and how valuable are they to a notion of British culture? So, to first of all kind of talk about Minecraft, I mean, what am I going to say about it that kind of hasn't already been said? I'm just going to go over here because my clicker's not working. So, I'm pretty confident that a lot of people in here know of Minecraft. Does anybody want to dare to raise their hands if they've never heard of Minecraft? No, okay, I think we're all safe. And so some of these key facts that I've got here, this is stuff we already know. You know, it was released 5 years ago, you can get it on pretty much any system, and I think most kind of importantly, its sales figures kind of very much illustrate how important it is to everyday culture. It is the third biggest selling game of all time, as of last June, I think, were the figures last published. The two that beat it out, the best-selling game of all time, does anybody know the best-selling game of all time? No?
Wii Sports.
No, Wii Sports is the second. And that's cheating as well, because Wii Sports is the second biggest selling game of all time, and it was packaged with the Wii, so that doesn't really count. And then Tetris is the number one. And that's had a 30-year head start on Minecraft. So already to kind of get up there in that slot, and it's probably going to overtake certainly at least Wii Sports in the next few months, I'd imagine. But it's very kind of it's kind of hit our culture quite kind of strikingly, and as a result, academics have started to take an interest in it. So again, kind of in Dean's talk this morning, he very much looked at kind of academic ways of thinking and talking about games, and Minecraft is no exception. This is a book that was released last year, Understanding Minecraft. It's a whole book full of different essays on the Minecraft phenomenon. And on the first page, Nate Garrelts, who wrote the book, or edited the book, said that Minecraft has engaged the popular imagination so profoundly that it has transformed video game culture. Now that's not an idle statement, to say that it's completely transformed a culture. And that just kind of gives you a sense of the ways in which Minecraft is talked about. That it's had such a wide-reaching impact that it is something which we should be thinking about and thinking about the ways in which it's talked about. So I'm just going to kind of talk through a few different examples relating to the game in this first part of the talk, and just to show you how different kinds of value can be attributed to the game. So first of all, we've got educational value. So Minecraft is something which is being used in classrooms to the point where it's being used so prevalently that Minecraft Edu, a kind of officially supported educational version of the game has been licensed and it's being available to schools. So all of a sudden we have this sense that, oh, okay, we can bring games into the classroom now and we can use them to learn and we can do all these sorts of interesting things with them. And kids want to do it as well, which I think is the interesting point. It's not something that's being forced upon them. It's something which has naturally been embraced and adopted in classrooms. So all of a sudden we can see Minecraft being used to kind of illustrate this kind of educational value. Then we have a sense of economic value as well. In 2014, September 2014, Microsoft quite famously bought Mojang, the developers of Minecraft, for $2.5 billion. Inordinate sums of money. It's a mind-bogglingly large amount. And yes, they bought Mojang, they bought the studio and everything, but it was based on that one property. It was based on the profitability of Minecraft. But you had this one guy, Notch, who developed the game from scratch, and it was his baby, and he kind of made everything. And he had this one idea for this game. And all of a sudden, a few years later, it's translated into $2.5 billion. So all of a sudden, people say, oh, hang on, games today can make us a lot of money as well. So they can be educational, and they can also make us lots of money, which those two things aren't necessarily seen as being bedfellows. We have an idea of cultural value as well. So this is, does anybody recognise this building at all? From London? Do you recognise it?
Yes, London.
It is, it's the British Museum in London, absolutely right. So there's been projects to kind of recreate spaces such as the British Museum. There's also been the Tate Craft project, which is actually taking works of art from the Tate and building them in Minecraft so you can kind of explore the artwork itself. And then there's a sense that actually Minecraft itself is a form of art. So in that Understanding Minecraft book, Michael Sinclair says, oh, it works as a radical gesture in sculpture, performance, installation art. So Minecraft itself is this kind of artistic product. So all of a sudden it has these kind of high cultural value that we can associate it with museums and art galleries and things that video games aren't typically associated with on a grand scale. We can also think about kind of the wide-reaching cultural impact that Minecraft has. I mean, you see the merchandise absolutely everywhere, and then imagine most people who walk around the Games Festival, you would have seen Minecraft. There's a Minecraft T-shirt right there. Merchandise. It's absolutely everywhere. Minecon is the kind of the big convention. You've got intertextuality. Dean mentioned that word intertextuality, and texts referring to other texts. So you can get Simpsons Minecraft skins, you can get Skyrim Minecraft skins, Marvel superheroes, the list goes on and on and on, Minecraft Lego. So it's just so kind of culturally ubiquitous that we see it kind of absolutely everywhere. And because of this, so we've got cultural value, economic value, educational value, cultural ubiquity. As a result, we start to see it used in varying different ways. We start to see Minecraft itself used as a kind of a marketing tool, a shorthand tool to reference all these types of value in other spheres. So we've got here, this is Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London. And he announced, or he was part of the announcement of the London Games Festival, which is happening in a few days' time actually. And as part of the kind of the launch video for that, he appeared as a Minecraft figure and kind of walked around a little Minecraft London world and talked all about things to do with games. He clearly didn't have a clue what he was saying. He was clearly just kind of reading off a script. But it was interesting that they chose Minecraft to illustrate the Games Festival in this way, because it has all these connotations that all of a sudden we can see, oh, okay, we've got Boris Johnson in Minecraft there, and Minecraft is good, right? Well, it's got educational value, it's got cultural value, but then other people can see, well, all the investors can say, well, actually, Minecraft makes a lot of money as well, so there might be sort of ways to make money at the London Games Festival. So we see in which kind of a game like Minecraft, which is pretty, I'm not going to say it's completely unique, but it's pretty striking the fact that it ticks all those different boxes, and it can we can ascribe all these different kinds of value to it. But it's pretty telling that they decided to use Minecraft for that. As a political tool, it's being used in a kind of a political way that Boris Johnson can take this and use it for his own kind of cultural cachet, if you will. So why is this important then? Why are we thinking about the ways in which kind of games can be valued? I'm going to go in a what is initially going to seem like a really boring direction, and all I ask is that you bear with me on this. I'm going to talk about tax breaks. Now, I am a film and media studies scholar. My background and my training is in watching films and analysing films and thinking about them, talking about them. I never thought I would be here talking about tax relief, but here I am, and we're in this together now, so you're just going to have to bear with me. It will all make sense in a little while. So in 2014, the government managed to push through tax relief for games developers. And basically what that means is that British games companies could claim back some money that they've spent. So, for example, for every £1 million that was spent on a game, they could claim back 20% of that. So they would get £200,000 back in their pocket. So it can be kind of applied in all sorts of different ways. I'll talk a little bit about how that gets applied. But basically it's the idea that if people are making games in this country and fulfilling certain criteria, then all of a sudden they can get money back. So it pays to make games here in Britain. And why that's important is because when politicians and trade bodies were trying to push through this tax relief, they started talking about the games industry, and they started using particular kinds of language and particular ways of describing working practices to try and get this tax relief put through. And I thought it was really interesting starting to look at some of these things and seeing, well, why is it that Ed Vaizey, the Minister for Culture, talks about games in this way? And so he talks about that it's encouraging to see that companies benefit from the tax relief represent a mix of organisations from across the UK, furthering the creation of jobs and skills development in the industry. So he's talking about kind of creating jobs and getting people working, which is kind of interesting, because that's not necessarily the thing we instantly think about when we think about the games industry. We then have different trade bodies and advisory groups, people who have kind of a stake in the games industry being successful, so people who want to see the games industry thrive. And so we talk about Tiger, who are the Independent Games Developers Association, talk about employment in the sector falling and they want to kind of create more jobs. Nesta, who's a charitable body, talk about making net returns and bringing in foreign investors to the country. UKI, who are the number one trade body in the UK, talk about describing ourselves as a nation full of history, quirks, and loveliness, and being something about kind of British, creating games that have a particular kind of British feel to them. And then we have the people who make the games themselves. So we've got Imre Jele from Bossa, who talks about kind of cultural heritage in storytelling and gameplay. Harvey Elliott from Marmalade talks about British people creating exciting and innovative content. Giselle Stewart talks about kind of culturally unique content. And so we've got here politicians, trade bodies, game developers, all talking about the same industry. They're all talking about the same thing, and they're all talking in relation to this tax break idea. But they're all talking about kind of different ideas. So we've got ideas about kind of creating jobs. We've got ideas about skills development, boosting the economy, being competitive on an international scale, and then also something about cultural specificity, so creating something particularly British. And that's kind of interesting to me, because if we were to think about just kind of the games themselves, we might be able to kind of like analyse different narrative forms in the game, or different ways of playing games, or what they mean to us. Actually, we start to look outside the game, start to look at the context in which the games are produced or spoken about. We start to see that actually the games industry isn't just about creating games, it's about kind of being something more, being something bigger than just an industry. It's about being something kind of globally competitive. It's about saying something about Britain and what it means to be British and what British content actually means. And I think that's kind of interesting, just to kind of take that step back and have a look at the way in which people talk about the industry. So, back to tax breaks. if my clicker works, there we are. How do people get tax breaks? So there's different kind of criteria that people can use to get these tax breaks. So they have to have content that is supposedly done by that features kind of British people, or features British characters, features British locations, features something within the game that is notably British. It also has to have a cultural contribution. So it has to say something about our culture and kind of almost give back to culture in some way. It has to be made in particular places. So it has to be made 50% in Britain itself, and it has to be made by British people as well. So there's all these different criteria that people have to fulfill, and so when people are submitting their game to be able to get money for their tax breaks, they have to kind of go through this big form and say, yep, I do this, I do this, I do this, and there's a total of 31 points, and they need to get 16 out of those 31 to be eligible for the tax breaks. So we've got what the game is, we've got where it was made, we've got who made it, but something is a little bit odd. This one, cultural contribution. What does that actually mean? What does that actually mean for something to contribute back to culture? It's kind of nebulous. What do we actually mean when something kind of has cultural value? How do we say that something is valuable to culture or not? What criteria do we use? And part of the problem is that the people who make the decisions on this haven't actually told us. So when we think about what it means to be British, or what does a British game have to involve or have to feature to be able to kind of contribute to culture, we're not sure. We're not sure what that actually means. So there's a couple of issues wrong that I kind of see with kind of assessing value for a particular game. So firstly, that there's no sense that a game has to contribute in every category. So it only has to get 16 points. So it could not make a cultural contribution at all and still be deemed as British. Or it could not actually be made in Britain, but if it qualifies through these other things, then it would get the points. And so secondly, the idea is that all of this is, all the decisions about this are made by somebody. So there is no kind of strict checklist that says, okay, to be British, you have to do this, 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 and this. The decision is made by somebody, in a room, and they look at the form and they look at the application and they say, oh yeah, okay, I agree with that, I don't agree with that. And that's kind of a problem when it's all up to one person. There's no kind of strict guidelines as to what constitutes Britishness or British content within a particular game. So that makes it difficult when we start to think about kind of cultural specificity, when we start to think about kind of games giving back to British culture in some way. So Yuki said this. So this was in an interview when the tax breaks got released. This is Joe Twist, who's the CEO of Yuki, saying, well, actually, no, you don't need to fill games with cliched views of Britain, cups of tea and Spitfires and anything else, that's kind of quirky and British. Actually, the cultural test has been designed to be kind of flexible to recognise a broader sense of what it means to be British and perhaps actually European. We can think about kind of our games kind of fulfilling some kind of European criteria as well. And so what we can kind of recognise from this is that cultural value, kind of the engagement and impact of arts and culture reflecting something back about Britishness is not necessarily prioritised. It starts to suggest, although we can kind of think about the meaning of culture, its use as a bargaining chip is kind of called into question. And we see the way in which kind of ideas of culture are being sold to us. So, oh look, okay, well, we make British stuff. We've got some kind of traditionally British iconography here. So we've got a bowler hat, we've got the flag, we've got a royal worm, we've got a soldier as well. And so there's all these kind of competing ideas going around. So on the one hand, yeah, we want to celebrate kind of Britishness and explicit Britishness, but on the other hand, we don't want to venture too far into there because then that kind of pigeonholes us somewhat. And we can see this when we start to think about the games that do actually qualify as British. So a game like GTA 5, for example, qualifies based on the fact that it was made in Scotland by Rockstar North. So it was made in Scotland. A number of the people are from the UK. It is in the English language, but we might argue that GTA 5 is not necessarily reflective of British culture. We might more readily associate it with American culture, for example. The same with Batman Arkham City, made by Rocksteady Studios, who are in Cambridge, I think. Again, it qualifies as a British game because it was made in the UK and it was done by UK staff. But yeah, how many of us think about Batman as being a British text? And so it's all of a sudden we can start to see this kind of disparity between wanting to kind of promote people making games in this country and also, well, what does it actually mean to be British? What does our culture actually mean? In a report kind of commissioned by UK last year, they said that games like Grand Theft Auto, there's an unambiguous, significant engagement with British cultural produce around the world. I would argue against that. I would say it is kind of ambiguous because can we actually claim GTA as British? And it harkens back, there's similar kind of arguments because there's a similar kind of tax break initiative with films. And Harry Potter qualifies as British because of a lot of those criteria. It was filmed here, British actors, based on a British source text. But where does the money come from? The money comes from America. And so then can we really say it is a British production? And so again, once you start to kind of look beyond the text itself and look at who's making the game and why they're making the game and where they're making it, all these other kinds of issues start to come to the fore. And so I think one last thing I just want to kind of touch on is, well, who does this affect? Does it affect the people kind of making the games? So I did some interviews with some developers talking about various different issues. And one of the things that came up was this idea about kind of business versus art. Games developers want to make art. They want to create things. Whereas on the other hand, you've got this sense that you need to kind of have a good sense of business management. If you want to make money, if you want to make your $2.5 billion, you need to kind of have a sharp mind on your shoulders. So one developer said that art is about creative expression, business is about making money. Another developer said that really creative people who really love games, are sometimes the people who are the most uninterested in the business side. And I think we see this tension throughout, particularly when it comes to valuing games. On the one hand, we have a sense that games are really important to our culture because they create jobs and they create skills and they make us money. But on the other hand, what do they actually say as an artistic product? And there's these kind of business versus art, this competing discourse is going on all the time. And I think it raises some interesting questions. So I think the first question is, well, how should we decide what is valuable about games? What do we actually mean when a game is valuable to us? Secondly, what does a cultural contribution actually consist of? What does it mean for a game, a book, a film, a TV show to contribute to culture in some way? And finally, who is actually responsible for leading the direction of a creative sector? Is it the people that make the games, or is it the people that make the policy or make the money? And I think that kind of raises interesting questions. I just think I wanted to show you with this talk just what happens when you just kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and look at the context around how your favourite games get made. It's really important and valuable to look at the game text themselves and what games can do. But I think it's equally as important to look at who makes games, why they make them, and what kind of environment are those games released into. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions? Or?
Yeah.
Do you feel the tax breaks of the games industry in Britain reflect a very 20th century view of nations and cultural identity as a national body that's perhaps not reflective of the world of the 21st century and the internet age.
Okay, I'll just repeat the question just for my. So it was about whether this idea of tax relief and an idea of what donation is a kind of a 20th century idea as opposed to kind of a more globalised view of the 21st century. And yes, I think it is, and I think that's kind of where the tension comes from, because the tax breaks do favour, and they're heavily weighted in favour of where the game is made, who is making it, and kind of what's inside the game. And that kind of cultural contribution is less weighted, I think. And it kind of goes to demonstrate that actually, you know, people can do move around, and people can, you know, don't have to necessarily live where they're brought up, and things can change. And so I think the idea of a game being British, I think this actually kind of does compensate for that. I think it's I think the structure of tax breaks is kind of and what it means to be kind of British is kind of antiquated, but I think it does allow for a more flexible definition of what Britishness actually means.
On that note, on the idea of the flexibility of the nation construct, I think it's really interesting actually, I guess, how is it being positioned, because it's part of the wider discourse, I guess, of the commodification of culture, or how culture secretaries will want to say things like, intrinsic value versus market value, and stuff like this. And it's stuff which the government has a big problem with, where it's trying to create the nebulous thing, Britain, which doesn't exist, which never existed, which is just a place or an idea. It's an imagined community. And they're trying to frame it into something which is also a saleable commodity. And the commodity form is what they're using to try and patch these things together. The commodity form is so bizarrely flexible and ethereal that now Max Payne is British. And now we have this idea of yeah, like games are great now. Games are the art we like because they're the commercially realizable kind of art form, as opposed to, so they make great sculptural gestures, they're great installation art, except for the fact that they're not, thankfully, gestures, performance art, or installation art, which is harder to commodify and harder to sell because it's impermanent structures and it's hard to relocate. So I think, yeah, it's kind of interesting. It seems like a great sort of illustration of the way in which culture is being reduced to changeable commodity form, and the way that it's like being used as kind of a poster child for the current government is something which has me greatly concerned, and the Silicon Roundabout and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's sort of, it's like, oh, we can stop, and also the way they talk about like sort of job creation, or the focusing on kind of concrete generative potential in games is interesting, where it's kind of we're currently cutting and excising all the kind of armature of the states and getting rid of the physical infrastructure in this country and relocating that elsewhere. But we are creating this ethereal, superimposed, virtual set of structures and industries which will keep Britain great, and we're going to use that word great because we're nationalists and horrible. But
yeah, and so the question about kind of government involvement and their kind of commodification and their packaging of this idea. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think the interesting thing about kind of governmental involvement in this is that the larger gestures that they make, like Ed Vaizey coming in and kind of talking about these kind of things, it happens after the success of games. So it happens after kind of games has been proven to be kind of a commodity that can be sold and can be exploited, for lack of a better term. And so I think, yeah, when you talk about kind of political involvement, it is a very canny political move for them to kind of back this winning horse, because games are kind of only going to grow. The bubble is not going to burst anytime soon. So they're kind of hitching to this wagon, rather than necessarily kind of saying, oh, actually, there's an interesting sector that's not being talked about. Let's go and help these people here. They're actually saying, oh, look, that's on the rise. Let's kind of piggyback on that and kind of and then we look better because we're producing jobs and we're bringing in money and we're making the country look better on a grander global scale. It's also interesting that I don't know if anybody had seen the Boris Johnson video that accompanied this image, talking about kind of the London Games Festival. If you were to watch it, if you were just kind of, an everyday consumer, a fan of games, that video is super boring because all he's talking about is money and money. He's, there's made these big valuations of billions out of blocks within the kind of the Minecraft London. And it's all about, well, if you come here, look how much money you can make. Look how much money is in this industry. Look how prosperous it can make you. And I think that's where kind of the danger between this kind of business versus art comes in. Because all of us, I think there's maybe a fear on the part of some developers who think that, well, actually, if people are going to start to see this as a cash cow to be exploited, other people who, we're going to start to see kind of more clones of games, for example, or we're going to see the people getting their IP ripped off. Whereas actually what we want to do is just make the games we've been making, but all of a sudden you see people wanting to kind of inject money in there, and that kind of sours the pot somewhat. So there is, I think, a fear and a bit of a tension from the attention that kind of the games industry has been getting. Yeah, Paul.
Tom, I found it interesting because I think it's kind of almost from my talk to your talk, two different ends of the spectrum. We've got the start, which is supporting through tax breaks, and then we've got the end, which I was talking about this morning, about preservation. And at some point in that process, they lose interest. And I wondered if it came back to that, the first of your conclusions, and whether you could comment a bit on that, about where that value judgment changes, or whether you feel that value judgment changes and why, if that makes sense.
I mean, I think it also comes back to the thing I was just saying to Merlin about riding the coattails of something that's successful, because it seems that the way using Minecraft as a great example, so I kind of picked it for this talk, is that they're using it to say that games can do all these great things, but they're using Minecraft specifically because it has that educational value, that cultural value, that economic value, but it's not British in any way, shape or form. So they're talking about the kind of the British cultural identity, but using a property that isn't necessarily British. And so I think it's about at that kind of that beginning stage, backing winning horses and backing the things that are going to do well, and then they lose interest once it stops making money, once it stops being important. If we ever get to a time where kids stop playing Minecraft or anything like that, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But the government aren't going to use Minecraft to promote themselves anymore. They're going to use whatever the new trend is. So yeah, I honestly think it's just about kind of picking the properties that are hot properties and kind of riding the coattails there. Is there any more questions, or are we good?
Okay, thanks.
No. All right. Yeah. Thank you very much.